mindset help Joseph overcome his childhood trauma? So basically, we're just looking at elements in those scriptures, like to understand. Okay, awesome. All right, well, we're back, and okay, and what's your name, sir? Okay, brother Danny, you can. We'll have the mic to you.
I don't remember if this was mentioned this morning, but from what I see here, Joseph realized that God permitted this event to happen in his life in order to save a nation.
Yeah. All right, that's excellent. And just let's see. Okay, Sister Clark.
I'm a pain, and I'm happy because somebody has to be something. And
Okay.
I'll just take my role. I need you to repeat the question
No
one
problem.
more time.
Okay. How did the Genesis 45, 4 through 8, and Genesis 50, verse 20 mindset help Joseph overcome his childhood trauma?
I will say that it did not help him.
Okay.
Now, I'm very specific about the way you're asking the question. I would say that he came to a mindset long before these chapters and these verses that caused him to be able to share with them what he had already come to. The fullness of it had to take place with him engaging with them again. I mean, the dream itself couldn't even be fulfilled without the bowing, right? And without the sun and the moon coming into it and everyone bowing. So it had to be self-fulfilling. But what I would say is this did not help him. This was a revelation of what had already gone before. Like what Sarah said this morning, his mind changed. However long that trip was from where he was in that pit, taken out and sold to the Ishmaelites, however long a trip that was the time period when Joseph became a man of God, where he chose God, where he went through the grieving process, some of the healing process, some of the hopeful process after having gone through the loss of his family and the grief of that, the death of all of that. It was a death of sorts, right? And it seems back then, because they didn't have the cars or modern technology or telephone or the Pony Express, when you left, you were gone. You pretty much gone for good. And so he died and then grieved, right? There was a death and there was grief and then there was hope. And in the process of those three things, he went through forgiveness, a change of heart, a change of mind, and a hopeful looking forward to what God had already showed him. So this is just the expression of what happened before. You get what I'm saying? In terms of the way you're asking the question.
I hear you, but I think that this I think that this personally illustrates a mindset that he's had. I don't think it's just like when he said that that's the first time his mindset was what was expressed, but it's just it's sharing a mindset that I think he's had for a long time. But those elements in that mindset are things to dissect to see how do we what do we get from that to see how to address childhood trauma today, and that's really what I was looking at. But go ahead, Daniel.
The mindset that he had that enabled him to overcome that, I believe, at least partially, he had the dream when he was, he had the two dreams when he was far younger, and up until the fulfillment of those two dreams, he was always looking forward to the fulfillment of those two dreams, where God was going to use him in whatever way would cause that. And so I can just imagine that every day he wakes up, every day he realizes that hasn't happened yet, and every day he's looking forward to the fulfillment of that prophecy. And so every day he pushes on.
Gotcha. Just as you kind of confuse me if you have your hand up or not. Pastor Clark.
I'm asking a question. Did Joseph understand that it was a prophecy before it was revealed to him that it was a prophecy when his brothers came? Because I don't know, I don't see anywhere in the Bible where he knew what the outcome would be of his dream. And I don't know if it was, I would speculate it wasn't revealed unto him until his brothers came and said, oh, now I understand my dream. Yes. So up until this time, I don't think he understood it.
Okay, I agree. Whether he knew it was a prophecy, yes or no, I don't know. But at least for the time when he was in prison, remember, he had an opportunity there to explain dreams. Remember? 2 dreams. And he knew through that experience, at least, right? Because for according to what Daniel was just sharing, when you have those kind of powerfully impactful dreams, because a lot of us dream all the time, but we don't even remember. Then some of us dream, we remember, we know it's foolishness. And then some of us dream some dreams, it's like, oh, what does that mean? And we go on with our lives. Then things may happen later, and that dream comes back, or something flashes before you, and you're like, that dream. So I'm sure he was having expressions of that throughout, but especially when he was in the prison and had the opportunity, because they were asking him, well, this happened, I had this dream, and then he explained the dreams, and then the dreams were fulfilled to the letter. At least at that time, he knew. He would have to know, like, God used me in this. God was faithful in bringing this to pass. Those dreams, he's going to do something with that. Whether he recognized, which I think he didn't. I mean, who would think, without running for president, you're going to be president? Now, he wasn't president, but he was, whatever you want to call it, governor, prime minister, change your name, all of this, the whole story, rags to riches. I don't even know if he had that in his mindset, but he knew that God gave him these 2 dreams that meant something powerful in terms of his purpose on earth. And it wasn't jail, and it wasn't slavery, it wasn't in Potiphar's house, but what it exactly was, he didn't know. But I believe that God showed up in that jail experience, prison experience, for him once again to say, okay, God is with me. Not that I'm saying he doubted, but it's nice for you to get assurance, and that, okay, well, this came out, it's the way God showed me, and I told them, and mine will surely be fulfilled somehow, some way, and still holding on to the hope of that.
Sister Sassett.
I agree with what she said about, he may not have known that it was he didn't know until, what it meant, what those dreams meant until they came to pass, But the spirit of prophecy does say that Jacob knew that God was trying to tell Joseph something. Oh, yeah. And whether Jacob said something to Joseph, we don't know. There's nothing recorded in that instance, but it does say Jacob knew that God was trying to tell Joseph something.
Okay. All right, Pastor Clark. Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, it's similar to both threads of both of the ladies here. Oh, sorry. But what I see it is that he did know in the first dream that he really believed his brothers would be bowing down to him, including his mother and father, because he acted on that in his attitude towards his brothers, and his brothers got angry and upset and jealous, whatever, because of the way he was doing. All right? So he had faith that that dream was real. But then the testing time came on the trip to Egypt. And what happened? This is not what the dream said. So he then, about halfway through, he did choose God and said of my father. that he was going to trust that that dream really was true, that he misunderstood it somehow or another, and that God will bring it to fruition. And so he acted upon that because of the way he acted was a godly manner after that, which is what got him the honor to end up being who he was in jail, or prison, however you wanted to put it. So I think he changed on the way. He had the testing time. Instead of breaking him, he had to doubt and question and confirm to his own mind whether or not that dream was real. He understood it to be real. I had the dream. It fits. So what's wrong? But on the trip, he said, I chose the God of my father, and if he said it, then it's so. And he lived the rest of his life accordingly. And so I believe he already did make his mind up and did know the dream was true, and therefore his life reflected that, which got him where God wanted him to be. Now, the forgiveness part could have been during that time or before. I don't know about the forgiveness part, but he tried, and that's when it started, through the testing time, at the end of that testing time, until he said, I'm going to choose God as my God at that time.
Okay.
I have a question, and based on the answer, then I'll have a thought. And my question is, I don't know if anybody looked at it. Maybe the blended family did. When Joseph had the second dream, was his mother still alive, or was his mother dead? She's died. Okay. So the question is, not the question, the comment is, why did Jacob say
His mother.
his mother?
Yeah.
Okay? Now, I believe she was dead. Okay? But it just gives more detail that Jacob knew this was a prophecy. Or else he wouldn't say, he recognized the moon and the sun and the moon bowing as himself, okay, and his wife, or a woman, let's just say that. Okay? So that gives us some insight in Jacob knew this is a prophecy. How it fulfills itself, well, he's dead. In Jacob's mind, Joseph is dead after the entire event. And so the prophecy goes nowhere. I mean, there must have been thought in his mind, well, why did he have that dream and this and that? You understand the complication of it all? You know, because he believed the dream. And the Spirit of Prophecy says he contemplated, you know, even all that stuff. But that was my question. Well, his mother is dead, but he says, me and your mom is going to bow down? Yeah, right. It still doesn't matter. But what I'm saying, he knew it was a prophecy.
Okay. All right. I wanted to, I guess, I wanted to share my points on the text that we initially went through, and then we can go from there. But one we already talked about, but I'm just going to read it, part of it again. And this was like about Joseph's mindset that he shared, you know, with his brothers. I'm not reading the verse, but the verses that we covered was Genesis 45, 4 through 8, and then Genesis 50 and verse 20. And so the points were like, in order to deal with his childhood trauma, Joseph didn't forget it. We looked at that. I said these, but it's like, Joseph processed his childhood trauma by choosing to focus on how God was using it for him to be a blessing to others. And that's what basically we talked about. And this is what I want to ask you about too, number 3, because we have more time now. Joseph chose to look at his childhood trauma honestly. Why is that so important? Because he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Why is it so important to be able to state the truth about what has happened? as opposed to holding on to a lie about it. What is so important about that?
Okay, I don't know that I'm answering a question you didn't ask. How you like that? You probably don't like it. I feel like that response from Joseph was not necessarily about what you just said, like him being honest or whatever, and sure, fine. I think that was more to convince them of who he was. I'm not just Joseph, I'm Joseph, your brother, who who else could know that but? When they saw him, they did not see Joseph, their brother. He left at 17 years old. How many males in here were 17 years old once upon a time? Right? And then, how many males in here that were 17 years old once upon a time looked just the way they did at 17? Right? Not many, or maybe none. But beyond that, now you have Joseph, who was 17 at the time, right? And so there are a lot of changes that go on from 17 to 30-something, right? 30, or, because I don't know if it was...
He was 39. He was 39 because they had 2 more years. They had been 2 years into the famine. So he was 30 as like second in command, and then you do 7 plus 2, and you get 39.
39, okay. Whatever the case was. 30...
I'm sorry, 7 years of playing. Sorry,
Plenty, right.
2 years of
right.
into the famine.
He gave the meaning, and then
Yeah.
he was appointed at 30, and then we move on. Okay, so 30-some. So he looks different, but not only is he could have grown. He could be taller, right? Most definitely. Then you know how the Egyptians dressed? He dressed like an Egyptian, and we know like something about the way the Egyptians dressed, on the basis of when Moses was left his home and was in the palace, right? And then he had killed a man, and then he ended up fleeing, and he was in Midian country. And they said, oh, this Egyptian helped us. But he was a Hebrew. But he looked like, he dressed like, he spoke like. So they're seeing someone who dresses like, speaks like, and looks like an Egyptian. And he's saying, I'm Joseph. No, I'm not just Joseph the Egyptian. I'm Joseph, your brother. I'm not just Joseph, your brother. I'm Joseph, your brother, who you sold into. He's giving more detail. For me, this is how I see it, for them to know, it is me. And look here, I'm not going to kill you. Come closer, right? So that's what I saw. That's what I picked up on. Not saying that there isn't more, but that's how I took it, that he is trying to let them know without a doubt, because in their own hearts, if you read in Spirit Prophecy, they had him for dead too. It was like, we killed him. Even though they hadn't killed him in the pit, and they hadn't killed him when they took him out of the pit, but when they sold him, he was as good as dead. We had this many brothers, and one is not. That's what they said. One is not. What's not? He's just not here. Like, right. Did I say one is dead?
It does say dead.
Okay,
it
look
says
at that.
not at one point, but then if you look at Genesis Judah with Genesis 44:20 through 22, it does say dead.
Dead. Okay, so look at he's dead. So can the dead live? Or did this Egyptian somebody know Joseph at some point, even though he's dead? And he's saying, it's me. Who else could know all of that but me? And so then they were like, scared, but
Okay, so does anybody think? Yeah, because do you think that honesty has anything to do with healing from childhood trauma, and do you think that played any type of role? Or because you have Joseph who states the truth of what happened, his brothers state something that didn't happen. They say state a lie. They say he died, he's not, and all this stuff. You know, what's the relevance of truth? Now the Bible says in John 8 and verse 32, it says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." But what is that? What does that actually mean when dealing with a situation like this, where you have you're sold into slavery? Go ahead.
Okay. The question I would ask is, and I'm just asking that question not as a means of a short response. When Joseph was living at home with all his brothers, was he traumatized? Traumatized. That's right. He was spoiled, right? He was spoiled. Are spoiled people traumatized? Traumatized? No. Okay. But I know we keep talking about childhood trauma. He was 17 years old. He's a youth. The Bible calls him a youth. You know, so it's not like he was traumatized from a child. So how he deals with the situation now is going to be different than a child, because he is actually a youth. I'm not saying that the pain was not there. Surely it was. But as we look at this experience that he's actually going through, it's different than a smaller child trauma.
Okay, let's take the word childhood out. How does honesty help with dealing with trauma? Regardless of his childhood trauma or not, or does it, like, how does having looking at something with on a truth basis, how does that help the situation? That Sister Burke.
Can you remind me of where the last verse that we read?
This is
this
I'm gonna
morning?
write it on the board.
No, you don't need to. I wasn't in here when you started.
Okay,
It
Genesis 45.
Okay.
4 through 8, and then also Genesis 50, verse 20.
Genesis 50, verse 20 is what I want to get to. That, it says, "But as for you, you thought evil." Okay. But God meant it for good. I believe, this is what it says in Patriarchs and Prophets. That as, he told them, he brought up the fact that they were, yes, this is me who you sold into slavery. That the reason he did that, I believe, was to continue on to say, "For God did send me before you to preserve life." And he was saying, basically, what you meant for bad, for evil against me, verse 20, as you thought evil against me, but God meant it to be for good. And that's the point he was trying to bring out. The evil was, you sold me into slavery, and you meant that to be evil. But here's what, it wasn't you. God sent me ahead to prepare this, to preserve, your lives, that type of thing. So I don't think that it was, yes, it was truth, he wasn't lying, but I don't think it had to do with, I think he brought it up for the end goal, the end result of what God had done in the whole situation. But if we want to speak generally in terms of trauma and childhood, or even young adult, whatever, I think it's important to face it and deal with it. But I think God, in this situation, God dealt with it. It's like Joseph presented that, look at how God dealt with this whole situation. So.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I guess some things that I was thinking of, at least, and actually something that someone shared about, like, what makes truth relevant in terms of dealing with painful situations or bad, no matter if it's, I guess, if you're a child or a young adult. This is someone that, I'm not sure she's like a Christian counselor or something like that, but she said, the more we start looking at our dysfunctional situations in a truthful way, even if it's painful, the more it will become objective instead of subjective emotionally. This is healthy and good. Holding on to our pain and not dealing with it only extends the grief. So we could look at things not from just feeling like sometimes people can just think about the pain and just focus only on the pain instead of looking at it on a truth basis that gives the objectivity of how to actually deal with it. If that makes any sense. And someone, when I put this on Facebook, someone said this. She said, many people only know how they feel, not when they started feeling that way and in response to what. Our feelings are our own, and others' words and actions are their own. Everyone is responsible for his own actions, and we don't need to avoid the mention for fear of causing pain. We will always subconsciously identify with the offender with his action and the hurt that it has caused until we admit and state the action was done as an act or an event. Then it is no longer just a person or a feeling whenever we are around that person or think of them. It is an action for which they can repent and we can recover. Honesty truly heals with Jesus' help. So yes, go ahead, Pastor.
Yeah, so along those lines, when Joseph chose God to be his God, I think there's a transformation that took place in his life. Now, there are two examples that we can actually look at that shows the character of the man. And the first one is in Potiphar's house, falsely accused of something that he did not do. There's nowhere in the Bible where you see that Joseph stood up and said, I did not do this. This is wrong. She's a liar. You don't see that. You don't see that at all. And so that tells of his character because he was truly trusting in God to be his defense. The second thing is he goes to prison for that, right? Again, the baker and the butler, they had a dream. They forgot Joseph. Well, yeah. Yeah, one was dead. But the baker was still alive. But he forgot. Was it butler? Okay. All right. No. It's all right. Anyway, they forgot Joseph. But you don't see it in the Bible where Joseph said, oh, man, I knew they wouldn't. They forgot me. He just continued. And I think that was God's plan, for them to forget. Because when the fullness of time came where Pharaoh had this dream, that's when he needed to come out of jail to fulfill the mission that God had for him. So as you look at his character, which is pretty much a type of Christ, who's falsely accused, you see whatever experience he had, I think by having God, it was actually dealt with. The reason why a lot of people go through experience in life where they cannot overcome is because they don't go to Christ, and maybe they don't know Christ, and so that person is not there to actually lead them, and therefore they suffer in that traumatic experience for years and years and years, and it never goes away because they need Christ in their life to kind of say, hey, I can lift you up above this, where you can live and be joyful and not be burdened with what has happened before. Not to say you will forget it, but because Christ is in your heart, it doesn't bring you lower and lower and lower. It lifts you up.
Yeah. All right, Daniel, and then we're going to go on to a little bit more points, but go ahead.
What Mr. Garfield said made me think of something. Was it necessary for Joseph to go to jail for the whole situation to happen? I don't think so, because while God used the jail situation to tell the Joker, the butler, the butler his dream, who then proceeds to forget about Joseph for 2 years. Joseph was already in Potiphar's house, Potiphar being a captain of Pharaoh's guards. So Joseph could have found his gift of revealing dreams and in that station without having to go into jail. So the whole disbelieving Potiphar's the whole lying Potiphar's wife and throwing him into jail instead of killing him because Potiphar didn't really believe he did it. That was all not necessary. That was all completely a bad situation that had really no redeeming qualities.
Well, actually, now with the prison, well, when Joseph was at the Potiphar's house, he learned languages. He got to be with people of a state, or at least one language, but he got to be with people of high position. In the prison, he was able to see more of injustices and things like that were happening. And those two positions were able to help him to be able to govern the people of Egypt better. And so that was actually brought out in the Spirit process. I was trying to find that, but it's in a sea of quotes that I have in here. Go ahead, Sister Burke.
Well, it's interesting you said that because I didn't see this in Spirit of Prophecy, but I was thinking, as Daniel said that, could it be, well, nothing happens without a reason. And then could it be, while I do see what you're saying, Daniel, like God could have, he could have been at Potiphar's house till somehow somebody there at Potiphar's house could have needed a dream translated, you know, on, and then he could have used that. And we know that we still have an advocate, the devil, and while I don't, I mean, not an advocate, an adversary. Ooh, thank you for checking me. Oh, Lord have mercy. Lord, you know.
Pioneer does not agree with that statement.
Not advocate. Oh, anyway, we have an adversary, the devil, right? So Satan's always, there's always that side where he's, you know, he's there, but we still know that nothing happens to us that God doesn't allow. So at the same time, we don't know what's in Joseph's character that God needed to keep, to balance and to keep him pure, because he was in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar, and the environment wasn't obviously pure. So God is faithful. I mean, if he had to send him to jail to preserve him until his time came for deliverance, then that's what happened. But while they're in jail, like you brought out the other side of the thing too, which I didn't know, but that I agree. So
Yeah. Okay, and just two more things, I think. I have like my Google Docs in two different areas, so okay. The other point was he looked at his trauma in honest light, and he could accurately discern the character of God in the midst of his tragedy. And so he had the right view of the character of God. So when we're going through trials, that's what we should look at. It's like God always, and we know this is not just based on Joseph, but God doesn't change. So in trial, we have to know that every single time, God means for trial to be turned into a blessing for others. And so we should be looking for that if we're going to have the mindset of Joseph. And then the other thing was, I guess my last point was, Joseph found his purpose linked to his trauma. And he told his brothers, now, therefore, or we could say traumatic event, or whatever you want to say. He told his brothers, now, therefore, not be grieved, nor anger at yourself that sold me hither, for God did send me to you to preserve life. And God's greatest purpose for our lives sometimes comes out of our darkest days. And so if we have dark days, then it's like purpose is not too far away from that. And so that's the encouragement that we have. And so if someone is struggling to try to figure out, like, why did this happen, you know, and all these things, and if someone prevents that, prevents that discovery, or prevents them seeking for the truth, it's not only stopping their healing in one sense, but it's also stopping them from seeing potentially what their purpose is. Because God used that, and God's purpose was huge for Joseph. It was not just for him to be healed or and all this stuff. It's for him to save a whole nation. Actually, more than the nation. You know, more than just the Egyptians, to do other things as well. And so you know, the people that have, you could say, the greatest suffering in one sense, can have a very big and high and noble purpose, and that should be brought out and talked about. And we can see that in the context of his story. So those are some things I thought. And who had their hand up? Okay. Yes. Yes.
Well, I was thinking about it. You're talking about childhood trauma and how to deal with it. Well, I went through a childhood trauma. And so I want to address it the way my mother did and then apply it to Joseph, okay? Because we were talking about it was on the trip that he made his mind up for God, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was 4, something happened to me, and it was very traumatic. My mother explained it to me very simply. She said, the man that did that to you, he's sick in the head. He's sick. You didn't do anything. You didn't cause it. He's sick. So if somebody's sick, you pray for them. So we pray for this man. But the trauma, even though you know something bad happened, it does stay with you. But it wasn't from God's standpoint. It was from the culture of the society. And you're talking early 50s. Well, when I got older, then I understood what all these people were talking about. And I go, oh, well, there's no hope for me. I'm damaged goods. No man's going to take me home to meet his mama. But what I did not understand, which Joseph did, was unconditional love. And when I met my husband, and he asked me to marry him within hours, and I told him he was crazy, and that was one of the things I said, don't you think you should know this about your wife? And he said, did it happen the last 5 minutes? And I said, well, no. He says, well, it's in the past then. You mean all this meant nothing? Then I'm a good person? I mean, your family has to love you. Your sister and brothers have to love you. But, you know, society says you're damaged goods, you're no good. He taught me otherwise. And this is the love of the Father. And that's what Joseph knew when he was walking, and he chose his God. When he chose his father's God, he chose to forgive his brothers. He had already forgiven them, and he went on with his life. And it was like, well, whatever happens, it's God's will, whether it be good or bad, I'll just deal with it. Because in the end, God knows what's best for me, and I just have to deal with it. And that's what I've done ever since then when I learned the truth. But it was the two things from God, the unconditional love, and this person is a sinner, and you have to forgive him. Because if you don't, it destroys you, he says in the Bible. And Joseph had been around his father enough to learn a lot of these things that aren't covered in the Bible, but you know it had to happen for him to do what he did. So that was all I wanted to make sure that people understood. It does go with you, but it doesn't have to stay with you. It does not have to destroy you. You have to take God at his word, forgive that person, and hope to see him in heaven and say, hey, it's okay. Look what happened to me. I got a man for 47 and a half years. Boy, it turned out really good for me. How'd it turn out for you, you know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Amen. Sister Clark.
I was thinking earlier that some of the things that we experience in our life that are not good, God uses them to teach us how not to be. And what I mean by that is, and you probably already know, we've had situations where, I don't want to say this the wrong way, people came around us, I'm saying from the time we were married, to, I guess, benefit from whatever they felt we had to offer. And they would get what they could because we were that type. We would just, okay, it was me more so. But anyway, but my husband was in it, like, after it already happened, okay, fine. But We weren't, I'm not trying to, it's hard for me to say we weren't selfish. But we would give, you know, and we see somebody in something, we always felt like they need it more. You have it, you get, you know. And people would take, but then they would dump, you know? Like, oh, they got the free whatever, and then you wouldn't see them again. And that was, it was like, okay, that's how you are? Wow. Or we may get something, and someone would look at it and say, oh, I want your thing. Say, but we worked, you know, like 15 years. We've never had, and now we have, and now you want it? Wow. So as we experienced how some people were, not everybody, but too many people, we would say the Lord is putting us through these different situations so we know how not to be. Because it was almost like we were the underdogs, right? In a lot of situations. We were the ones with less, we were the ones without. But God was so good, He always made it seem to other people like we didn't, like we had, like we were, you know, we were the ones with the upper hand. We weren't. And so maybe that caused them to feel away or whatever. But they would do these things, and we would sit there and say, well, what was that about? And we'd always come back to, God is doing this. So by chance, we should have, right? Because it's easy to give 10%, 20%, 30% of zero. Y'all know this, right? Because 30% of zero is zero. But give 30% of 100,000. Give 30% of 1,000,000. Give 30% of 1,000,000,000, and you go on. Now, it's still the same 30%. It hasn't changed, right? But the test and the challenge may feel a little greater as you're like, whoa, look at this. I could have kind of did something with that. Right? But God is able, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation make a way of escape, that you shall be able to bear it. That is one of my go-to texts. We need to, in a certain sense, say yes and amen for the things that God allows, because according to Sister Burke, nothing can even touch us that God doesn't already weigh out and determine that we're able to handle it, that He's already given us the tools. So what we get sometimes that is not good, it is a teaching tool. So when we end up in situations where we have the ascendancy or the leadership or the financial prowess, we know how not to be, because we know what it is to be the underdog.
All right, Pastor Clark, and then might have a little bit more, and then we're going to close.
I think at all times, especially as Christians, we need to be in a state of consciousness. And what do I mean by being in a state of consciousness? It is so often that while we're going through trials, we tend to forget where God is. And again, and I think I said it this morning, I want to repeat it again, the trials in which we are actually going through is the means of God purifying us. Whether we feel we're in the wrong or the right, it really doesn't matter. It is God's means of purifying us, bringing us up to another level of perfection. But so often we are not conscious of that, and so we stare down. Our minds are on the issue or what this person has done to me, and we go on and on and on and on. And sometimes it takes us on a journey, a 24-hour trip driving across the country, still dealing with this issue. The reason is we're not conscious, we're actually drunk, because Satan has, given us something to drink to focus on that issue. And what God is actually striving to do in those moments, and that's what He did with Joseph, no matter where Joseph was. That's what He did with him. That's what He wants to do with us. Not to recognize, okay, I have this problem is, I'm involved in this problem. Let me focus on God. Let me not focus on the problem. For the more I focus on the problem, the longer it will take me to come out of this issue. And I think, I think that's my problem. Focusing on the issue, being in an unconscious state, or focusing on Christ, where I'm conscious. I know you have this, Lord. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to trust you. And that's where we need to be at all times. Is it easy? No, because we tend to forget. But we should ask God to remind us while we're going through these moments.
And just with that mindset too, like this Spirit of Prophecy quote, I want to read this about Joseph, because when that type of being, thinking about God, thinking about like how God is going to use him and all that stuff, seeking to be a blessing to others, then when he's walking around in the prison or whatever, his mind's not on himself, but it's on helping other people. And we see evidence of that when he sees the people in prison and he looks at their faces. He doesn't look at a mirror, doesn't record looking at a mirror and just looking at himself and being like, oh man, I'm just, poor me, I'm in this bad lot. And because he had an other-centered focus, looking and tapped into that purpose, that's how the Lord was able to lead him out of prison. And this is what it says. This is Review and Herald, February 21, 1888, paragraph 5. It says, Joseph did not complain at his lot, nor question why the Lord permitted him to suffer for righteousness' sake. He did not allow any cloud of despondency to settle upon his heart. He believed in God and patiently waited for his salvation. He determined that his affliction should serve as an occasion to glorify God and benefit his associates. So we see that same mindset of Genesis 45 and Genesis 50 in his prison experience. And there's more on that. But you go ahead, Pastor Clark.
When you started talking, it's interesting because remember the butler and the baker, they came, right? Mm-hmm. And Joseph noticed something about them.
Yeah.
Their countenance. So obviously, Joseph knew all the prisoners in that prison. Mm-hmm. And he had to have studied them because he says, well, hey, why do you look that way?
Yeah, why do you look sad?
Why do you look sad, right? So here's a person, like you stated, he was concerned about others, not so much himself. Yeah, exactly. And that's a big thing.
Yeah, and it goes on to say, he did not cease his efforts toward perfection of character. He forgot his sorrow in seeking to lighten the sorrows of others. And the prisoners saw that the Lord was with Joseph. When he had borne the proving of the furnace, the Lord brought him out of the gloomy cell and exalted him to a position next to the king of Egypt. Those who honor God will be honored by him. And so again, that goes to trauma being related to purpose, because it's like, if you think your purpose is to be a blessing to many people, it could be, we have these traumas. It's like, is God asking us to be a blessing for the nation of the United States of America? Is God using that? For us, we should be talking to ourselves in that context, because God has a huge vision for us. And it is when we are thinking of other people, that's how our sorrows, our pain, it goes away. And then it allows us to be that blessing. Okay, Sister Burke.
As I'm listening to this, and it may seem so unattainable to us, just thinking about Joseph's life and Joseph's experience, like, would we be like Joseph? He didn't have the record of his life to know the end of the story. All right, we have that benefit and blessing, but how many times do we, when in the midst of trials, are tempted to complain or be depressed? Let's just say we don't complain, but it drags us down in some way or another. And but God is saying, and especially in these times, we have to have this faith, this type of faith like Joseph. We need that. abiding trust in the Lord. I mean, he didn't do anything. He was upholding God's law with Potiphar's wife. He literally said, how can I do this great sin and sin against his father? I mean, he knew why he did it. He expressed why he did it, and yet he was put in jail. But did Joseph know that also he could have been killed and then he wasn't killed? You know, and then was he in jail thanking God that his life was spared and knowing that Potiphar didn't truly believe, you know? So all these things, but also just for us as individuals, Joseph also wanted to get out of jail. I mean, we look at it and it just seems like Joseph is just all the way up there, you know, like Jesus. Doesn't it seem like Joseph was just perfect, never, but he wanted to, and he was probably perfect because he was surrendered to the Lord. And that's what God is asking us to do, is just surrender. But here's the thing, he wanted to get out of jail. He asked them to remember him. So the quote-unquote human side, he was all human, but you know what I mean? Like, if we look at it from, okay, this is attainable. This is somebody who had feelings and he wanted to get out. He knew he was unjustly thrown in jail, but at the same time, there was his circumstance, but he continued to trust God through the circumstances. And it's so encouraging to me, because we see the end of the story and we see all of what was happening, all those years, like you brought. I didn't even think about how many years it had been till you said that today. And yet, we might be going through a trial right now and we're thinking, man, it's been 12 years, it's been 13 years, it's been whatever. And, you know, where's the end? When is it going to end? Lord, when is enough? You know, all of these things. But it's encouraging to me to think about this story and realize, you know what? Praise God in the midst of the trial. And then you know that he's working things out for his good. If we are faithful.
And if it's 12 years, you got to say, like, Lord, or we have to say, what is your great purpose for me? Because there's so many people that are going to be need to be benefited by through my experience, whatever that is. It's not like, I mean, because there's something big for that experience there. But yeah, we need to have that mindset, and so Joseph's story is a never-ending story, but we got to end. So I think this concludes the Blended Family presentations. We thank y'all for letting us present, and we had 4. This is the 4th. This is the 4th. This is another one. Oh, so sorry. We're still live. Are we? Okay. Okay, so bye everybody.